In recent weeks, tensions surrounding the American technology sector have been building, increasingly extending far beyond ordinary corporate news and becoming a subject of discussion in Washington circles, closed-door briefings, and analytical reports from leading research institutions. Elon Musk and Tesla are preparing what they themselves describe as one of the most ambitious projects in the company's history: the mass launch of next-generation Optimus humanoid robots. According to information coming from sources close to production lines in Fremont and from analysts monitoring component supplies, the line that previously produced the Model S and Model X has already been completely converted to robot assembly. Officially, production is expected to begin in late July or August 2026. During the latest earnings call with investors, Musk repeatedly emphasized that the initial stage would be painfully slow because of approximately 10,000 unique components, the complete lack of a mature supply chain, and the need to build manufacturing processes practically from scratch. Nevertheless, the long-term plans remain enormous. The goal is to reach production capacities measured in hundreds of thousands of units and, eventually, millions of units per year. Tesla is already designing and building a specialized factory in Texas with a stated potential capacity of up to 10 million robots annually. If these figures are even partially realized, Optimus could transform not only the labor market, but also the very structure of the American economy, redistributing added value, changing the skill requirements for workers, and creating entirely new value chains around the servicing, programming, and integration of physical AI systems. However, this is precisely where the real political and social drama begins, which, according to several sources within the administration and relevant government agencies, has already moved beyond a purely technological debate. According to estimates from analysts at major investment firms, research institutions, and independent economists, the mass deployment of such machines could replace hundreds of thousands of jobs, and over the course of several years, potentially millions of jobs. This concerns not only assembly line operations at automobile factories, but also logistics, warehouse complexes, basic service functions, loading and unloading operations, parts of agricultural work, and a wide range of tasks that have traditionally been performed by workers with medium and low levels of qualifications. Labor unions, particularly the United Auto Workers, are already openly describing the situation as an existential threat. At a recent UAW convention, its leaders directly warned about the risks of mass automation and humanoid robots, demanding strict employment protections and mandatory negotiations whenever new technologies are introduced. At some facilities, there have already been cases in which the introduction of even relatively simple cobots has taken place alongside workforce reductions, triggering strong dissatisfaction. Analysts note that if the pace of Optimus scaling comes close to the levels projected by Musk, pressure on the labor market in industrial states could become significant by the end of the decade. At the same time, China is demonstrating an entirely different dynamic, and this contrast makes the situation particularly acute for American policymakers. According to TrendForce, Nomura, Morgan Stanley, and other analytical groups, Chinese manufacturers, including Unitree, Agibot, UB Tech, and a number of projects connected with automotive giants such as BYD, are already shipping tens of thousands of humanoid robots per year and rapidly expanding their production capacity. Chinese companies operate at significantly lower prices, make extensive use of government support, subsidies, and administrative resources, and already account for a dominant share of global supplies. Beijing is explicitly pursuing the mass deployment of robots in manufacturing, and the pace at which production is growing is making American observers increasingly concerned. In Washington, this is viewed not merely as economic competition, but as a strategic challenge that could, within several years, call into question the technological leadership of the United States in physical robotics and related fields. If the United States falls behind in the race for physical AI systems, key industries could become dependent on Chinese technologies, components, and software. That is precisely why the Trump administration generally takes a tough position in favor of American development. Restrictions on Chinese humanoid robots are being discussed on national security grounds. Elements of industrial policy are being worked out. Possible executive initiatives are being considered, and mechanisms to support domestic manufacturers are being explored. And this is where the very dilemma that is increasingly being discussed by sources familiar with internal discussions at the White House, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Labor, and relevant congressional committees arises. On the one hand, Elon Musk and Tesla Optimus are essentially the most powerful American response to China's rapid advance. Suspending or significantly slowing down the program would effectively mean handing the initiative to Beijing and jeopardizing the long-term competitiveness of American industry. On the other hand, Trump has consistently positioned himself as a defender of the American worker and a supporter of an America First policy. The mass replacement of people with robots creates political and social risks that are difficult to ignore, especially when unions and part of the electorate in key industrial states are highly sensitive to the issue of job losses. According to people close to the administration, fairly heated discussions are taking place internally about how to combine technological leadership with the need to preserve social stability and prevent a sharp rise in unemployment or political radicalization in regions where employment has traditionally depended on manufacturing. Insiders cited in certain investigative-style reports by Bloomberg, Politico, The Wall Street Journal, and the Financial Times claim that the issue is not about an outright ban. The administration is unlikely to completely halt Optimus production. That would be too damaging both to the image of technological superiority and to relations with one of the most influential technology figures whose companies play a significant role in the space, communications, and energy sectors. A scenario of soft braking and more complicated conditions for mass deployment is far more likely. Possible measures include stricter safety certification requirements through OSHA and related agencies, mandatory retraining programs and phased implementation, requirements for regular reporting on the impact on employment, priority in government procurement only when detailed plans exist for preserving or creating new human jobs, additional inspections of supply chains to identify dependence on Chinese components, and tighter regulatory oversight. None of this would kill the project, but it could significantly extend the timeline for reaching truly mass production volumes and make the integration of robots into the economy more controlled and gradual. Some sources speak of the possible introduction of so-called transition periods, during which companies deploying humanoid robots would be required to invest in adaptation programs for displaced workers. Such an approach creates serious risks for Tesla and Musk himself. Any delay in the rollout of Optimus gives Chinese competitors additional time, as they are already operating in a phase of active scaling and accumulating real-world data from factories. Investors, who are already reacting nervously to every statement about production difficulties and revised expectations, could further adjust their valuations of the company. Musk himself has repeatedly called Optimus potentially the biggest product in Tesla's history, capable over time of surpassing the automotive business in importance, and any political or regulatory obstacles would directly undermine that bet. In addition, prolonging the process could reduce suppliers' motivation to invest in the new component ecosystem, which is still taking shape, and make it more difficult to attract capital for such a capital-intensive project. Analysts warn that if the American manufacturer loses momentum at the start of mass production, catching up with Chinese players that already have an advantage in production volumes and cost efficiency will become significantly more difficult. At the same time, Musk still has considerable leverage, and according to observers, these are precisely the tools he will rely on in the coming months. His public platform X allows him to communicate directly with millions of people and shape the agenda while bypassing traditional media. The economic weight of Tesla, SpaceX, and related projects provides a serious bargaining chip in negotiations with the administration. The complex but still existing channels of communication with the White House and key figures allow him to actively promote the argument that without rapid development of American robots, the United States risks losing the strategic race. Musk and his team can appeal to issues of national security, labor productivity, the return of manufacturing to the country, and the creation of entirely new industries related to the maintenance, programming, training, and management of robotic systems. Some analysts believe that this very narrative, robots as a tool for bringing manufacturing back and increasing competitiveness, rather than simply replacing people, will be central to negotiations with Washington. In addition, Musk can argue that slowing down American development effectively benefits China and therefore contradicts the stated America First policy. The consequences of one choice or another extend far beyond a single company and are already becoming the subject of serious debate among experts. If the administration actually chooses a path of strict balancing and begins introducing additional filters on the pace of deployment, this could slow America's advance precisely at the moment when China is gaining momentum. The strategic risk here is obvious. Losing leadership in physical AI could have long-term consequences for the defense industry, logistics, critical infrastructure, and the country's ability to rapidly scale production in the event of geopolitical crises. If, on the other hand, the United States chooses an extremely liberal approach without serious measures to help the workforce adapt, social pressure and political costs could increase. Experts are already discussing scenarios in which a sharp rise in automation without parallel retraining and social support programs could lead to growing tensions in industrial regions, stronger populist sentiment, and potential electoral losses. Some economists warn that tariff policies and incentives to bring manufacturing back, combined with powerful automation, could produce a paradoxical result. Factories will return, but they will employ fewer workers than politicians and voters expected. The question of exactly what new jobs could emerge around the humanoid robot ecosystem also deserves particular attention. Optimists point to the need for engineers, maintenance specialists, system operators, data specialists, programmers, and robotics integration managers. Pessimists note that the number of such positions will almost certainly be significantly smaller than the number of low and medium-skilled jobs displaced, especially during the initial phase. Historical parallels with previous waves of automation show that the transition period is almost always painful and requires active government policy. That is why, according to sources, the administration is discussing not only restrictions, but also possible incentives. Tax benefits for companies that combine robot deployment with retraining programs, grants for the creation of adaptation centers in affected regions, and reporting requirements on the net impact on employment. Ultimately, the picture that emerges is one of a fragile balance that, according to many observers, will determine how events unfold over the next 1.5 to 2 years. Elon Musk continues to push forward one of the most ambitious technological projects of the modern era. China shows no signs of slowing down and is ramping up production of inexpensive and reasonably capable machines, while the Trump administration is forced to simultaneously support American technological leadership and prevent that leadership from turning into a political crisis caused by mass job losses. For now, all indications are that there will be no outright ban. However, the possibility that the path to a truly mass launch of Optimus will prove more complicated than Tesla expected appears entirely realistic. Sources familiar with the mood in Washington say that the question being decided right now is not whether robots will arrive, but how quickly, under what conditions, and with what social protections America will allow them to enter its economy. And the answer to that question will largely determine who emerges victorious from the new industrial revolution: the United States or its main competitor on the other side of the Pacific, as well as how painful this transition will be for millions of American workers. In Beijing, developments surrounding Optimus and possible moves by the US administration are being watched with heightened attention, and the Chinese side's response is already beginning to take shape along a fairly clear and pragmatic line. According to sources familiar with discussions within relevant government agencies and research centers associated with the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, as well as materials appearing in state media and confidential analytical reports, China views what is happening not as a threat, but rather as confirmation of its own strategy and, at the same time, as a window of opportunity. The official narrative, which is increasingly heard among experts and on the pages of publications such as Global Times and People's Daily, is that the United States, faced with a real lag in the scale and speed of humanoid robot deployment, is beginning to look for ways to slow down its competitors under the pretext of protecting jobs and national security. In Beijing, this is described as a classic manifestation of technological protectionism, which, in the view of Chinese analysts, will only accelerate China's progress. Chinese manufacturers are already operating under conditions that differ dramatically from Tesla's cautious and still largely experimental approach. Unitree, Agibot, UB Tech, and a number of other companies, with active government support, are increasing production, lowering costs, and actively testing machines in real-world manufacturing environments. According to estimates circulating among Chinese industry analysts and supported by data from international research groups, Chinese humanoid robot shipments in 2026 could significantly exceed initial forecasts, and by the end of the decade, China expects to secure dominant positions not only in terms of unit volume, but also in terms of total cost of ownership. Government officials emphasize that robotics is not merely a commercial product, but an element of long-term industrial and even defense policy. Therefore, any signals of possible regulatory complications for American manufacturers are viewed in Beijing as an additional incentive to increase government investment, accelerate the localization of key components, and expand the presence of Chinese companies in third-country markets. The dilemma facing Washington itself is being discussed particularly intensely within the Chinese expert community. According to a number of Chinese political scientists and economists, Trump and his administration have found themselves in a classic trap. On the one hand, they must maintain technological leadership and avoid surrendering the field to China. On the other hand, they cannot allow automation to become a political blow against their own electorate. In Beijing, this is interpreted as a sign of internal weakness within the American system, where short-term political calculations are beginning to conflict with long-term strategic interests. Chinese commentators note that if the United States actually begins making the conditions for the mass deployment of Optimus more difficult through additional safety requirements, employment reporting obligations, or phased implementation rules, this could give Chinese companies another 1 or 2 critically important years to strengthen their positions. According to sources in the Chinese industry, this time gap is currently regarded as one of the key strategic assets. At the same time, China is intensifying efforts to promote a narrative designed to reinforce its image as a technological leader in the eyes of its own population and international partners. State media are increasingly showing footage of factories where humanoid robots are already performing real-world operations, emphasizing the low cost of Chinese models compared with Western counterparts, and highlighting the fact that China is uniquely positioned to achieve mass deployment. Experts are discussing the possibility of a more aggressive expansion into the markets of Southeast Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America, where American and European manufacturers currently have a limited presence and price is a decisive factor. In addition, there are proposals to tighten export controls on certain critical components and technologies if Washington continues to toughen its rules regarding Chinese robots. Although there have so far been few open threats, the very fact that such measures are being discussed indicates that Beijing is preparing for an escalation of the technological confrontation. Internal documents and closed-door discussions described by sources close to China's robotics industry show that Beijing is seriously considering a scenario in which American regulatory barriers and political uncertainty surrounding Optimus could become a strategic gift for China. If Tesla is forced to slow down its scaling efforts because of domestic US restrictions, Chinese companies will have the opportunity not only to widen their lead in production volumes, but also to accumulate more real-world data from industrial sites, improve their algorithms, and reduce costs even further. Some analysts in China openly say that the window of opportunity could be relatively short, and therefore investments in manufacturing, talent, and infrastructure must be accelerated as much as possible right now. State-owned banks and funds are already receiving signals that financing projects in the fields of embodied intelligence and humanoid robotics should be treated as a priority. A separate part of China's response concerns national security and dual-use applications. Although the official emphasis remains on civilian uses, experts note that mass production of reliable and relatively inexpensive humanoid robots could also create a significant foundation for defense-related tasks. In this context, any attempts by Washington to restrict or slow down American development are viewed in Beijing as additional confirmation that the strategy of technological self-sufficiency is the correct course. According to some reports, Chinese military analysts are already studying possible scenarios for using such systems in logistics, engineering work, and support operations, and accelerating the civilian program only expands this technological foundation. Thus, while Washington is engaged in a complex and largely unavoidable debate over the balance between technology and jobs surrounding Optimus, the picture in Beijing appears considerably more unified and offensive. Chinese authorities and companies see American hesitation not so much as a threat, but as confirmation that their emphasis on speed, scale, and government support is working. And the louder voices become in the United States calling for a slowdown in the name of social stability, the more decisively, according to sources in Beijing, China will accelerate its efforts. In this sense, the story surrounding the possible complications in the launch of Tesla Optimus is already becoming an additional argument for China to pursue an even more aggressive industrial policy. And it is precisely this asymmetry in responses, cautious balancing in Washington versus acceleration in Beijing, that could determine in the coming years who ultimately sets the rules of the game at the next stage of the Industrial Revolution.